I had been sober 12 years, 4 months, and 9 days when the Vessin put a cup in my hand. I want that on the record first, because everything else in this account will sound like something a man made up in a bar. And the one thing I can tell you about myself with total confidence is that I had not been in a bar since I was 31 years old and had to be carried out of one by 2 men I had called friends the week before and never spoke to again. So 12 years, 4 months, 9 days, then a cup. We came into the Wraith system on the 11th of a month the Vessin do not recognize, aboard the envoy frigate Kindly Word, which is 940 meters of the least warlike thing the fleet has ever consented to build. She had 4-point defense turrets and a hull the color of wet slate, and she carried, in place of a magazine, an ice hold and a chapel, and a room full of gifts nobody had decided how to give away. Command had been very specific. Nothing that could be read as a threat. Nothing with a barrel over 40 millimeters. Nothing that hummed. I was the ranking Marine aboard. 11 of us, total, which is not a security detachment, it is a gesture. We had sidearms locked in a safe that only Commander Braddock could open, and which, as far as I know, he never once did. Wraith is a dying star. Not dying the way people mean when they are being poetic about the evening, dying the way an old animal dies, slowly and with a great deal of heat and noise and no dignity whatsoever. It is a red giant in the last few million years of its swelling, and its corona reaches out past where its inner worlds used to be, a wallowing, staining, boiling nothing, and the light off it turns every human face the color of a wound. We came in through that light on a long, low approach with our transponders singing and our guns cold and our shutters open so that anyone who cared to look could see the crew moving inside. That was Braddock's idea. Let them watch us make coffee, he said. He was 58 and had commanded a heavy cruiser and had asked for this berth specifically, which at the time I took for humility and now understand was something closer to appetite. The Vessin had told us where to be. They had told us in a transmission that took an entire watch to decode and which, when it was decoded, turned out to be about 4 sentences long and 1100 years old. A standing invitation, broadcast on a loop, that had been drifting in that quarter of space since before anyone on the Kindly Word had a surname. It said, those who wish to be spoken to may attend. Those who attend may drink. Those who drink may speak. Those who will not drink are unclean, and the unclean are sanctified. Our xenolinguists spent 4 months on that last word. In the end, they left it as sanctified, because the alternatives were worse, and because both alternatives were true. The sensor hung in the corona shadow of Wraith, tucked behind an artificial screen the size of a small moon so that the station itself sat in a permanent cool crimson twilight. It was bone white. That is not a metaphor. The Vessin build in a calcified ceramic that they grow rather than mill, and the 9-fold sensor was a nested set of 9 white rings, each one turning inside the next at a different rate, the whole assembly 40 kilometers across and studded with 10,000 vents that trailed pale smoke into vacuum where smoke has no business being. It was on fire in 9 places at all times. That was the point. It was, in the most literal way available, a censer. Around it, in a devotional ring, sat the third choir. I counted them from the observation blister at 300 because I could not sleep. 106 hulls. Long, slender, fluted things, white as the station, with what I first took for decorative spines running the length of them, and which the sensor watch informed me at 340 were spinal mass drivers, one to a ship, each of them capable of putting a 9-ton slug through a planetary crust. They were arranged in a shape. From above it would have been a symbol. From where I sat, it was 106 guns pointed at a dock we were about to tie up to. Ceremonial, Signalman Bay said. He was 23. He said it the way you say a word you are hopping to hear agreed with. Ceremonies kill people, I said, which was unkind, and I regretted it. And I bought him a coffee in the mess an hour later and did not apologize because I did not want to take it back. I wanted him ready. The Vessin came aboard to prepare us. That was the protocol. 3 of them in a shuttle that made no sound at all, and they walked our passageways for 2 days with the patience of surveyors. They are tall, 2.5 meters most of them, though they do not stand straight, they carry themselves folded slightly forward, as though listening to something at chest height. Their bodies are narrow and their arms are long, and their skin, where it shows, is the gray of old paper. What shows is not much. They wear layered vestments and a hood, and inside the hood there is a face that is mostly a vertical seam, and above the seam, set wide, 4 eyes in 2 pairs, one pair small and dark and mobile, the other pair large and pale, and we came to understand, mostly ceremonial, they see almost nothing with them. They are the eyes you are meant to be looked at with. The senior of the 3 was called Deacon Iliath. I use she. And the Vessin never corrected us, and I do not know if they were being polite or if the question is simply not one they hold. She carried the cup case. She was the one who explained the rite to us, in the wardroom, over a table with nothing on it, and I have thought about the way she explained it about once a week for the rest of my life. She said the anointment had been meeting new species for 2,900 years. She said that in all that time it had learned that a species will lie with its ships, and lie with its treaties, and lie beautifully and at length with its words, and that there is exactly one place a species cannot lie, which is inside its own body while it is being hurt. So the rite was this: one envoy, one body, the species chooses it. That body drinks anhol, which she pronounced with the seam of her face opening slightly, a soft sound like a page turning. 3 cups. The first cup is bitter. She said it in the flat way you'd say that a hammer is heavy. The first cup is bitter, and it is nothing. The second cup burns. She said the second cup opens the small vessels behind the eyes and in the lining of the gut, and that the pain of it in a Vessin lasts about 120 heartbeats and does not stop until it stops. The third cup kills most who take it. Not all. That is the entire architecture of the thing. Not all. A species whose envoy drinks the third cup and survives it is a species that has been shown to the anointment naked, at the moment when it could not perform. That species may then speak, and be spoken to, and trade and send ships, and exist in the same volume of space as the Vessin without being cleansed out of it. A species whose envoy refuses the cup is unclean. The choir sanctifies it. She said that with no relish at all. It was, to her, a piece of hygiene. A species whose envoy takes the third cup and dies. She paused there. Her small dark eyes moved. She said, "Then we mourn and we withdraw, and we do not return for 400 years, and the record shows that the species was honest." And she said that of the 11 species who had come to the censer in her lifetime, 4 had refused and been sanctified, 5 had sent an envoy who died on the third cup, and 2 had sent an envoy who lived. I did the arithmetic in my head. Everyone at that table did. Braddock said 2. 2, she agreed. Envoy Halima Das, who had said nothing for 40 minutes, said, "Where are the 2? Iliath's hood turned. "One trades with us, one is a client, both live." "And their envoys?" "The one who lived, lived. The other lived 9 days. Das nodded slowly, the way you nod at a diagnosis. She was 61 years old, a small, dry, brown-skinned woman from a colony world with a bad sun, who had spent 19 years negotiating water rights on planets nobody could pronounce, and who had a laugh like a hinge, and used it about twice a year. She had a husband and no children, and a garden. She talked about the way other people talk about faith. She said, "Who drinks for you?" That was the question. I did not understand at the time that it was the question. I thought it was politeness. Deacon Iliath's small eyes stopped moving. It was the first time any of us had seen a Vessin go still. "I do," she said. "For the hierarch. For whoever must be answered for." "How many times?" A pause. 406. Das looked at the table for a while. Then she said, "Thank you, Deacon," and asked what the room would be like, and how many steps, and whether there would be chairs, and whether her people could be present, and Ilieth answered all of it. And the moment went by, and I was standing against the bulkhead with my hands behind my back, and I did not understand then that I had just watched two civilizations look straight at each other for the first time, and neither of them had said anything about ships. Here is what I had not told anyone aboard, and what I had told exactly 3 people in my life. I was a drunk for 11 years. I was a functional one for 8 of those, and a spectacular one for the last 3. I have been to a captain's mast twice and lost a stripe and gotten it back and lost it again. I have driven a loader through a bay door. I have missed a friend's funeral because I could not be woken. The thing nobody tells you about getting sober is that it does not make the drink go away. It makes the drink into furniture. It sits there in the corner of every room you will ever be in for the rest of your life, and you learn to walk around it, and some days you forget it's there. And then someone at a table pours something, and the sound of it makes your whole spine come to attention like a dog hearing its name. I had gone 12 years, 4 months, 9 days without touching it. I want you to understand that I was not afraid of the Vessin's poison. I have been shot. Fear is a physical event, and it comes and it goes, and a professional works through it. I was afraid of the cup. The right hall was in the 4th ring. We walked because there was no other way to go, 40 minutes of white corridor with the smell of the vents in it, a smell like hot chalk and cloves, and the walls carved in a script that Bay later told me was a list. Just a list. Names of species. Some of them had a mark next to them, and Ilieth told us when asked that the mark meant sanctified. There were a great many marks. The hall itself was a shallow bowl, maybe 60 meters across, with the floor stepping down in 9 rings to a flat white disc at the bottom, and on the disc a single stone table, and on the table a case, and around the rings, standing, absolutely motionless, perhaps 400 Vessin. 900 of them wore gray. That's wrong, I mean that most of them wore gray, and they stood in the upper rings, and they were the acolytes. The lower rings, closest to the table, held maybe 40 in white and gold, and at the bottom, in a vestment so heavy it had to be carried at the shoulders by 2 others, stood the hierarch Suvan. He was old, even across a species, even across a body plan that shares nothing with mine, you can read old. He was folded further forward than the others. His pale ceremonial eyes had gone the color of skim milk. He did not look at us with them. He turned his hood a few degrees and used the small dark ones, and I felt that. Our party was 9. Das, Braddock, Surgeon Lieutenant Tomas Vidal, a thin gray-haired man from a mining moon who had a Vessin medical text in his hands and had not slept in 3 days. Petty Officer Deli Onafua, the ship's quartermaster, who had come because Das asked for someone who knew how to pour, which we all thought was a joke. Corporal Inez Cabrera and machinists Mate Andrej Sikora and signalman Yusuf Bey, who were there to carry, record, and stand. And 2 Marines, Private Adami and me. No weapons, not one. Braddock had been very clear. We came down the rings and stopped where Ilieth stopped, and the hierarch spoke, and the translation came through the bead in my ear a half-second behind him, which meant I heard the shape of his voice before I heard the meaning, and the shape of it was a slow grinding, like a millstone with sand in it. He said, "A species has come to be answered for. Let the body stand forward." Das stepped down onto the disc. She had not been ordered to. She had been offered a way out 4 separate times on the passage in, once by Fleet Command, once by Braddock, twice by Vidal, who had spent the transit trying and failing to synthesize an antagonist for a compound he had never seen. She had said no 4 times in the same tone, the tone of a woman declining a second helping. Ilieth opened the case. The cups were ash glass. That is our name for it. Shallow, footed, about the size of a small orange cut in half, gray-green and full of a grain like smoke trapped in ice, and there were 9 of them nested, and only 3 were lifted out. The anhull was in a stoppered vessel of the same material, and it was colorless, and when Ilieth poured, it did not sound like water. It sounded thicker than water. It sounded like oil going into a pan. That sound went straight down my spine and stood every hair on my arms up, and I locked my knees and stood the wall, because that is what I was there for. The first cup is bitter, the hierarch said, and it is nothing. Das took it in both hands, which I later learned was not required, and which the Vessin apparently found remarkable. And she drank it in one motion, and she set the cup down on the stone, and she stood there. Nothing happened for maybe 10 seconds. Then her face changed, not much, a tightening at the jaw, and she coughed once into her fist, and when she took the fist away there was nothing on it, and she said, in a perfectly level voice, "Bitter." Some sound went through the gray ranks in the upper rings. Not a word. Air moving through 400 vertical seams at once. Ilieth poured the second cup. The second cup burns. She drank it the same way, both hands, one motion, set the cup down. And then the kindly words envoy to the Vessin Anointment went down on one knee on a white stone floor 40 light years from anything that had ever loved her, and stayed there. I have seen men shot through the abdomen. There is a particular way the body folds when the pain is coming from inside it, and there is nothing to press. Das folded that way. Her breath came out in a long, thin, controlled hiss through her teeth, and it kept coming out, and it did not stop, and her hands were flat on the stone, and her arms were shaking, and blood came out of her left ear and ran down into the collar of her coat. Vidal moved. I caught his arm. He looked at me, and I shook my head once, and he stopped, because 106 ships were sitting in a shape outside, and he was a doctor, and he knew what an interruption to a rite would cost. It lasted 120 heartbeats. Hers, not his. I counted them off her carotid because I could see it moving under the skin, and because counting was the only thing available to me. Then she straightened, slowly, on the ball of one foot, then the other. Blood on her chin, blood in her eye, her mouth open and her breath sawing, and she got herself all the way up to her full height, which was not very much, and she wiped her face with the flat of her hand and looked at it, and then looked at the hierarch. "Burns," she said. And Suvan's hood tipped a degree, and I would swear on anything you like that the old thing was pleased. He said, "The third cup kills most who take it. It is not required. Refuse, and you are unclean, and we will be very sorry." He said that. We will be very sorry. He meant it. That was the horror of the whole afternoon. Every one of them meant every word. Ilieth poured the third cup. The sound of it was the sound of my life. I want to be clear about that, because I have never found the words, and I am going to fail again now. The pouring of it. The particular note that a small heavy liquid makes going into a shallow vessel from 20 centimeters up. There is not a man in this galaxy who has ever been where I have been who does not know that sound. And I was standing on a white stone step with my hands behind my back and my mouth full of water and my whole body leaning toward that table, and I was 43 years old. Das reached for it, and Tomas Vidal walked past me. He did not run. He was a slow man. He did everything slowly. He ate slowly. He talked slowly. He had a way of examining you that made you want to confess. He walked down 2 rings with his hands loose at his sides, and he stopped at the table, and he lifted the third cup out from between the deacon's fingers before she had finished setting it down. Das said, "Tomas." He said, "You've had 2." And he drank it. I have never heard a room do what that room did. 400 Vessin, and not one of them made a sound, and the silence was so complete and so sudden that I could hear the station's rings turning, a subsonic grind through the soles of my boots that I had stopped noticing days before. Deacon Ilieth had gone entirely rigid, the pouring vessel still in her hand at the angle of the pour. The hierarch Suvan said one word. My bead did not translate it. It has never been translated. Our best guess is that it is not a word so much as a sound a Vessin makes when it is watching something that cannot happen. And then Vidal went down, and it was much worse than Das. The third cup is not the second cup made stronger. It is a different thing. Das had bled from the small vessels. Vidal bled from everything. He went down on his side with his knees coming up and his hands over his face and blood coming through the fingers and out of his nose and mouth, and God help him, from the corner of his left eye. And he made no sound at all, none, for about 4 seconds, and then he made a sound I will not describe. And Halima Das, standing over him with her own blood drying on her chin, turned to the stone table and said to Deacon Iliath, "Another." Iliath did not move. Das said it again, and this time she said it in the 4 words of Vessin ritual speech she had made a 61-year-old woman's brain memorize on a 4-month transit, and she said them badly, with a colonist's flat vowels, and she held out her hand. And the deacon poured. I think she poured because she was 3,000 years of protocol standing in a body that had been asked, correctly in the correct words, for a cup. I think her hands did it without her. I have asked her since. She says she does not know. She says she has thought about it more than she has thought about anything in her life. Das did not take that cup. Petty Officer Dili Onafua came down the rings, and he was crying, and he was 29 years old, and he had a 2-year-old daughter on Kepler Station, and a laugh you could hear through 2 bulkheads, and he took the cup out of the deacon's hand with the small, careful bow he used when he handed the commander his coffee, because he was the quartermaster, and he had spent his whole life handing people things. And he drank it, and he went down beside Vidal. Cabrera was already moving, Sikora after her. Bay, who was 23 and whom I had told to be ready and who had been ready, went past me with his jaw set, and his recorder still running on his shoulder, and he did not look at me, and I did not stop him. The deacon poured, and poured, and poured. The Vessin in the upper rings, the ones in gray, the 400, had begun to move, not toward us. They had come down 1 step, all of them, as one thing. They had come down 1 step and stopped, and they were leaning forward over the rings, over each other's shoulders. 400 hoods turned down toward a white stone disk where a line of 8 human beings was standing and going down in order. Because that is what it was, a line. Nobody organized it. Nobody gave an order. Braddock did not give an order. I watched him not give one. I watched him stand there with his hands at his sides and understand, about 2 seconds before I did, exactly what was happening and exactly what he was required to do about it, which was nothing, and then get in the line. The commanding officer of the kindly word stood behind a machinist's mate and waited his turn. And I looked down the rings at that table, and at the case of ash-glass cups and the vessel and the deacon's gray hand pouring, and I heard the sound of the pour, and my mouth flooded, and 12 years 4 months and 9 days stood up in me and screamed, and I walked down and got in the line behind my commanding officer. There was a cup left in the case. I counted. The case held 9, and Iliath had lifted 3 at the start, and the 6 that remained were being filled and taken, filled and taken. Adami went before me. He was 19. He had joined because his brother had. He drank it standing and stayed standing for a full 6 seconds, which is longer than anyone else managed, and then he fell so hard I heard his skull hit the stone, and I stepped over him because the line was moving. Braddock drank, Braddock went down. And then it was me, and Deacon Iliath of the Vessin Anointment lifted the last cup out of the case, and she looked at me, the small dark eyes, moving, and the great pale useless ones I was meant to be seen by, and she poured, and the sound was the sound, and she held it out. I did not take it in both hands. I want to be honest with you because there is no point in any of this otherwise. I did not take it in both hands like Das. I took it in one, the way I used to, with 2 fingers hooked around the foot of it and my thumb on the rim, a bar grip, a drunk's grip, and my hand knew that grip the way it knows how to make a fist, and my hand was steady for the first time in 3 days. I looked into it. It was colorless. It smelled of nothing at all. That was the last insult, I think. After everything, it did not even smell. I thought, if I drink this, I will have had a drink. That is what I thought. 12 years, and Vidal on the floor with his eye ruptured, and Anafua bleeding out of his ears, and 106 masked drivers holding on a frigate full of people making coffee, and what I thought, standing there, was that I was going to lose my count. And then I thought about Ilieth saying 406. And I understood, standing on that disk with a poisoned cup in a barroom grip, that in 2,900 years the Vessin had never once put a cup in the hand of a species and had it taken twice. That every civilization that had ever come here had done what any sane civilization would do, chosen its best body, sent it down alone, and stood on the rings and watched. That is what a rite is, one body so that the rest of the bodies do not have to. And their own rite ate them from the bottom. The hierarch had never drunk. No one in white and gold had ever drunk. The gray ranks drank. Ilieth drank 406 times for whoever must be answered for, and every one of those 406 times some very old, very sorry creature in a vestment too heavy to carry had stood at the bottom of the bowl and been answered for. I drank it. Bitter is a word. Burns is a word. There is no word for the third cup. The nearest I can get is that it was not pain in the way a wound is pain. It was as though someone had reached into the middle of my chest and taken hold of the part of me that decides to keep going, and begun, patiently, without malice, to unscrew it. I did not stay standing 6 seconds. I do not think I stayed standing at all. What I remember is the floor arriving, and the white stone being very cold, and my own hand still holding the cup, and thinking, with the last coherent thought I had for 11 hours, "Don't break it, it isn't yours." And then I remember the light changing. They tell me it was 4 minutes. Bay's recorder was still running on his shoulder. It caught most of it, and the fleet has the file, and I have watched it exactly once. What the recorder shows is a white stone hall, and 8 human beings on the floor and one on her knees among them, and Deacon Ilieth standing at the table with an empty vessel in her hand, and the hierarch Suvan coming forward off his step with his 2 bearers stumbling under the vestment, and the old thing raising both long arms. He was calling for the sanctification. That is what the recording shows. The rite had been broken, not refused, broken, opened up and pulled inside out on the floor of his own hall, and there is no provision in 3,000 years of Vessin practice for what to do with a species that will not send one body. Ilieth told me later that in his hearing the only thing that had happened was heresy, and there is exactly one instrument for heresy, and it was already in a shape outside. The third choir began to move, 106 hulls opening their spines. And then the light in the hall changed. The right hall of the ninefold censer has one window, and it is not a window, it is a 50-meter aperture in the ceiling of the bowl, and through it always is the corona of the dying star Reth, a slow crimson boil filling the sky, the reason the station sits where it sits. The recorder shows 400 Vessin looking up. Because the corona was giving something back. It came out of Reth's fire nose first, and it kept coming, and it kept coming, and it did not stop coming. 4,100 meters of wedge-class battleship, black where it was not scorched, and it was scorched everywhere. She had been sitting inside the corona of a red giant for 9 days. Her ablative was gone in sheets. Her hull was blistered and running and refrozen, and blistered again. Panel lines gaping, weld seams weeping slag, her forward third the color of a burnt kettle, and the star's plasma still coming off her in long, slow, curling ribbons like she was carrying the fire out with her because she had liked it in there. That was the long memory. She had arrived in the Reth system 19 days before we did. She had gone into the corona 10 days later. She had held station in the corona of a dying sun for 216 hours, on a track that Admiral Gwyneth Sar's navigators had cut by hand, because the corona is the one place in that system where a hull's heat cannot be found, and because Fleet Command had read the Vessin's 1,100-year-old invitation with the same 4 sentences we all had, and had drawn a conclusion about it that Envoy Das had explicitly and formally objected to in writing. Hard Winter came out 3 seconds behind her. even hand 3 seconds behind that, both scorched to the ribs. And they did nothing. I want that understood because it is the part every retelling gets wrong. They did not fire. They did not lock. Bay's recorder caught the tactical feed from the kindly word, and the guns of the long memory were cold. Her drives were at station keeping. Her spinal weapon, which is a thing I have stood next to, and which is 900 meters long, was unpowered and would remain unpowered for the entire engagement, if you can call it that, which nobody has ever been able to. She simply came out of the star and stopped. And 106 Vessin warships, arranged in a devotional shape, with their mass drivers open, found on their boards a mass reading they did not have a category for, at a range they could not close, coming out of a place they had not thought to look, having been there. And this is the part Ilieth says broke it. This is the part she says the acolytes talk about now, having been there before they arrived. The whole ceremony, the 106 hulls in their sacred shape, the 9 burning rings, all of it had been performed for 9 days in front of an audience. And the audience had not interrupted. Admiral Saar sent one transmission. It went out unencrypted, on the broad diplomatic band, in Vessin ritual speech and in standard, and it was 11 words long in hours. She said, "Kindly word, this is long memory. We are not intervening." That was all. No demand. No terms. No speech to a defeated admiral, no accounting of tonnage, no invitation to consider what humanity was capable of. She named her ship. She named ours. And she told 106 warships and 400 Vessin, and one very old hierarch with his arms in the air, that she had been watching her people bleed on a stone floor for 4 minutes, and she was going to keep watching, because the envoy of the kindly word had signed an instrument of protocol, and the instrument said the rite was the Vessins to hold, and the fleet does not break another people's rite. Then she held position, for 19 hours, guns cold in the wreckage of her own hull, with the star's fire still coming off her. The hierarch Suvan lowered his arms.